Welcome to Alex and Annie, the Real Women of Vacation Rentals. I'm Alex.
And I'm Annie.
And we are joined today with Salar Tanzif, who is the VP of Sales for Guest Ranger. Welcome to the show, Salar.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I always see your guys' LinkedIn posts, and it's one of the best podcasts, I think, in the industry. There's a few good ones, but you guys are definitely the top.
Well, thank you very, very much. We do appreciate that. Before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to Guest Ranger?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a funny story. I guess taking like a bunch of steps back to my first big boy job was a financial advisor at a subsidiary of Merrill Lynch. It was called Merrill Edge. And it was for smaller accounts because I think Merrill Lynch is about 5 million. Merrill Edge is like 250 to a million. And then I got it when I was in college. I was 19 at the time. I don't even know how I got the job because I didn't have a degree. I was in school. And I remember there were interns there that were in school, and I was working there as advisor. And that was the hardest job ever. And it taught me a lot because the test you have to take it's called Series 7. And it's insane. So anyways, I got the job. It was really cool, but I just did not like what I was doing at all. No criticism to the team I was working with, but I just didn't like what I was doing. So I was like, you know what? I want to go into marketing. So I applied to about, I think, 300 or so marketing jobs because I had no experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And out of the 300, 5 of them responded back. One of them was a company called BizCore that I'm sure some of the listeners know about.
Yeah.
And that's where I got to start in the industry. That's where I started to meet people. And then from there, I met the people to go into Guest Ranger after a few years of BizCore. And now here we are.
Wow, that's interesting. When you first get out of school, it is it's like a shot in the dark. And just like with sales, it's, the number of doors that you knock on or resumes you send out, you have to do it in volume because you don't have a whole lot to stand on in the beginning.
But
yeah.
Well, thank goodness you didn't give up. I mean, that's a lot of no's to learn to accept. Right.
Yeah. And that's going back to what Alex says. It's about just counting the no's. Doesn't matter what it is in sales or applications with jobs. Just count the no's, and eventually you get to yes. And all it takes is one yes. So
yeah. Absolutely. So now with Guest Ranger, we'll dive into kind of the overall topic of what you do. I mean, security has become definitely an issue within vacation rentals, particularly over the last few years with Airbnb and just so many more players within the game. Tell us about what Guest Ranger does, just for our audience that isn't aware.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, a quick apology to the audience if my voice is kind of scratchy. I just got back from Canada, so I got this little scratch in my throat.
Wait, hold on. You have to say where you were too, because I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, so I don't think if any of your listeners don't know anything about Banff, because I didn't, but if you don't know and you're looking to go on a vacation, I would highly, highly recommend. It's an amazing place. It's BANNF. It's a weird word, but it's amazing. Just make sure you're not underdressed like I was. I'm from Arizona. So
didn't have the required ski attire, right?
Oh, we're jealous.
Exactly. But to answer your question, so essentially, we're like a risk management company. And one of the primary things we do is to screen guests, right? So what does that mean, screening guests? It could mean a lot of things. But if you break it down, it's a matter of stopping bad actors. So taking a step back, right? If I asked you, like, it's a dumb question. If I asked you, hey, you like your car a lot, I'm assuming it's a great car, right? Everyone likes a car. If you had someone from the internet that just reached out to you and said, hey, can I, drive your car around for a week? Would you just let them drive it around? Because I know I wouldn't if it's a random guy on the internet. No. So you would have some type of screening procedure in place. So this goes for really any assets, whether it's a car, a boat, a yacht. In our case, their houses or their homes are real assets that mean a lot to the owners that have them. So it doesn't make sense as to why you wouldn't want to screen a guest to see, do they have any shady background? Are they committing fraud? Are they using a stolen credit card or stolen ID? What have other property managers said about them? Because we have an internal network of reviews that our clients write. So it can mean a lot of things, but essentially, going back to what I said, it's really about a matter of stopping bad actors. And one quick thing too, it's not just a matter of revenue. It's not just a matter of like, oh, you're going to lose, units, or you're going to lose this reservation because of fraud. It's a matter of the reflection of what a bad guest looks like on our industry. Right, right now, I'm not sure if you guys seen the movie Barbarian, right? It's like a horror movie about in this Airbnb. This guy goes to Airbnb and there's like a monster living under it.
Wow, I haven't seen that.
I will avoid that one. I'll have nightmares.
So our industry doesn't necessarily have a good rep against people that are not in the industry, right? When you think about Airbnbs, you think about party houses and all these different things. So not screening your guests essentially adds more wood to that fire. It's really a matter of preserving the reputation of our industry. That's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I love the car analogy. That definitely makes sense on it too. And really, I hear a lot about from the hotel side of, why do vacation rentals? Why, how do you expect that you can just screen your guests? You don't have to do that to stay in a hotel or to stay in something else, but it is different. I mean, this is something that somebody personally owns. This is not a corporately owned property. So, it's definitely needed. And I think just eliminating the bad actors is something that we can all understand is important to the industry. And if this is able to cut that down, it's wonderful. And really, as a property manager, if you're able to tell your homeowners, whether they're on your program or thinking about coming to your program, this is something that we do to protect your assets, that makes you look like a very, very well-established, incredible source for them.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Because it's it's their asset. So what you said is on point. It's a really great homeowner acquisition strategy. Because again, it's not just a matter of risk management. It's also, in a sense, inventory acquisition. If I'm going up to you or Annie and I'm like, hey, can I manage your home? The first thing they're thinking about is, well, yeah, but I've heard a bunch of bad things about Airbnb. But if you can kind of ease that tension and they're worried, then 100%.
Yeah. We talked to Leo from Superhog when he was they were starting out in the US. And one of the things he talked about was in Europe, booking.com was really big. And so I know when they came to the United States, I was actually working at another channel at the time. And that was always the easy sell was like, oh, their guests are really bad and they have all these problems and stuff. And he said that in Europe, that he had people that were like, well, we're just not going to use the channel anymore. He's like, well, where is your business coming from? He's like, well, we're still trying to figure that out. We had to turn the channel off. And he's like, well, that's exactly why you want to use a tool like this. You want to be able to check your guests out. Yeah. So like it's so many layers deep, but I think, and the unfortunate thing that's come up, I think in the US, specifically in Florida's got a really big problem with it is trafficking. And so being able to catch these people and because a lot of times it's people that you wouldn't expect that are involved in some of these things, but just getting the information and being able to uncover. I mean, it's doing such good work, not only for the industry, but for the community at large. So I think what you're doing is very valuable, not just for the homeowner or the management company, but whatever community your management company is sitting in, it's helping out the community.
100%. Yeah. Unfortunately, in parts of Florida, that is a common thing. And hopefully to years to come, it doesn't become that common. But yeah, that is an unfortunate fact there. Where I guess it just goes back to what Annie was saying, which is, well, hotels don't do it. Why should vacation rentals? Because hotels have consolidated processes in place. They're established. They've been here for a long time. A vacation rental essentially is just some, not to dumb it down, but it's essentially someone just saying, hey, let me just manage all these units. It's not as consolidated as a Hyatt or a Marriott or, these giant hotel franchises. So yeah, that is an unfortunate thing. One other thing too, on top of that though, is how screening kind of ties and bleeds into the world of regulations, which I'm sure you guys know.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Is popping up everywhere like whack-a-mole. In Arizona, it's now a law where you need to screen your guests for sex offender checks, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I think it's a good law. But it does become bad laws, right? When you actually start to outright ban vacation rentals. And that's what's happening in big tourist parts in Oregon, some parts of Oregon, Atlanta. And if you can go to your legislators and say, hey, well, we take our job seriously, we're professionally managed, we do, we have noise aware, we have guest ranger, we have whatever, and we can see that they're not just throwing parties and we're not just booking bad people. And that really helps that argument, in my opinion.
We'll be back in just a minute after word from our premier brand sponsor, Costco, and co-sponsors Guest Ranger and Good Neighbor Tech.
Costco's founder, Steve Schwab, has been quoted as saying, "You can only be a local in one place." This simple yet profound statement is the basis of Costco's franchise model, which allows locally owned vacation rental management companies the ability to compete at a national level by leveraging the systems, software, and support the buying power of a much larger organization.
As a Costco franchisee, you have the freedom to run your business with the support of a community of like-minded professionals while leveraging the economies of scale and buying power to increase profitability and reduce operating costs.
Guest Ranger is the premier guest screening and chargeback protection solution. Leveraging AI, their tool effectively detects fraudulent activity, fake IDs, and underage guests, while also performing comprehensive dynamic background checks. With Guest Ranger, businesses can rest assured that their customers are safe and secure.
Good Neighbor Tech allows you to manage your properties remotely and intelligently, protecting your owners and your guests. Their smart Wi-Fi locks allow you to provide temporary access to home and garage from anywhere and keep track of when guests and service providers are in the property. Good Neighbor Tech provides the ability for you to collect email addresses from all guests staying in a property, not just the one who booked the reservation. Every guest who connects to the internet will see your branded welcome page and be prompted to provide their email address in order to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Visit Costco.com/franchise, GuestRanger.com, and GoodNeighborTech.com for more information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know in my local market in Myrtle Beach, one of the things that most companies don't do is they don't rent to locals because they're worried about parties, right? And it's not that we don't want to rent to good locals, but a lot of companies, they don't have that screening capability, and they're trying to prevent, people that are coming from just a little bit either outside of the Myrtle Beach area that might be coming for nefarious reasons, or it's like parties in town. But we're turning down a lot of revenue by doing that, because there are plenty of people, myself included, that, if I have girlfriends coming to town, sometimes we'll just do a staycation at a property. And luckily I know people to get it booked for me. But if I just wanted to do that on my own and book it online, it would say no, because I live in Myrtle Beach. So, I don't think I'm all that nefarious, but it's kind of sad. But yeah, I think I do run into that. I mean, is that a selling point in some markets, that just being able to rent to locals, or do you see that as something that companies aren't doing because of that reason?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So throughout cases of fraud, you'll see common patterns. One of the common patterns is local guests. Another common pattern are last minute reservations. So if someone books a day, 2 days before a reservation, that's a common pattern. Or even, the amounts of the units, so the dollar value of that reservation, if it's over $10,000, $20,000. These are things that are not red flags, of things that you should look into more. And so because of those different variations in fraud in different markets, right? Because Florida and Georgia, by the way, have the highest rates of fraud compared to, California or other cases. So because of the fact that every market's different, we have what are called risk rules or risk logic. So clients can actually implement certain rules and say, hey, look, if this is a last minute reservation and it's over $10,000, it's a local guest, let's apply more stricter checks on this person. Let's have them take a picture of their ID, credit card, face, and let's add a lot more friction to this. But for the rest of the reservations, let's apply checks that have no friction, that are frictionless in that sense. Yeah. Because essentially what you want to do is you want to reduce fraud, but not reduce your bookings, right?
Right, exactly.
You don't want to push people away. You want to verify them, but not in the risk of losing your revenue.
Right. Yeah. So how does the process work? So again, like for a guest that calls in, you put in these parameters, but does your team actually do any physical work, or is it all just automated through a computer system?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where I can kind of nerd out on this stuff. So
I love it.
Welcome to the
show. But essentially the backbone of Guest Ranger, the tool is all AI. There's different branches of AI. I'm sure you hear that word around a lot, ChatGPT and all these crazy trendy things. So ChatGPT is a language model. We don't work with that, but we work with what's called computer vision, which is a branch of AI that deals with computer vision, right? It's pretty straightforward. Basically what that means is anything that has to do with images or visual processes. So our models, we have separate models that are trained to detect certain deviations, let's say, of what's a normal ID or normal passports. So for example, in a normal ID in the US, there are certain emblems on the fronts, like the state emblem, certain security features, how the lighting is affected on the fronts, the deviation of the fonts, the spacing of the font, the size of the fonts, that give it the authenticity that it's a real ID, right? And then on the back of the ID, if you actually look at your driver license or passport, there's a little barcode. Let's call it a PDF 147 scanner. And within that barcode, there's all the information that's related to you, right? So 10 years ago, fake IDs were not sophisticated enough to have your information in that barcode. But now it is. I mean, now there are really, really great fake IDs. After this podcast, or right now, if your listeners want to, they can Google buy a fake ID on Google, and you're literally going to be hit with like a bunch of websites in the first page. I think Etsy is like one of them. You guys can Google it too.
Friendly fraud right there.
We made them in the basement in high school, but
yeah, exactly.
Now you can buy them on Etsy.
Yeah, but now it's like really sophisticated IDs. So that's essentially how our primary product works, is the fake ID and facial comparison check. The second type of product is going back to the risk score, the frictionless check, I should say, that I mentioned before. And what we're doing here is we're checking for what's called a synthetic identity or synthetic ID, which basically means like I steal Annie's ID, right? I put on a wig, whatever, I put on some lipstick, and then
this is really interesting.
You gotta be careful.
Salar's gonna steal my identity.
Guard your pocketbook.
When I put on a blonde wig, and then,
love it.
And then, but here's the thing, though. Let's just assume I don't know Annie that well. I'll just have her ID. I need to know her information, but let's say I don't. So I just make up information. I say, I'm Annie. I live on 123 Apple Street. My number is whatever. And if they have no way of actually checking the consistency of this data and making sure, there actually is an Annie that lives on 123 Apple Street, or no, there isn't, then you can get hit with what's called synthetic identity fraud. So we use MasterCard's ID engine. So they have their own ID engine that has a database of pretty much everyone domestically. Where we can see, does their phone number match their name? Does their address match their name? How old is that number? When was the email made, right? Did I just make this email yesterday, or is it 3 years old? And based on that, we give you a score. And that's where the frictionless check comes in.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I have so many questions. I'm sure you're
I know.
A lot of information. Yeah. I told you I was a nerd out on this stuff.
Well, it's super interesting. We've been excited to have you on the show because we wanted, we've learned about Guest Ranger, over the last couple of months, but I know the main benefit of it. And, Guest Ranger is one of our preferred partners for Costco. So I tell people about what you do, but I've never known exactly the science behind it. So it's interesting to know. But so if you put on the blonde wig and you take the ID out of Annie's pocketbook, but say you also took her debit card, right? So, back in the day, everybody used a fake ID at one point. Like you normally tried to have a backup. So if you have a backup card, you're not making up that Annie lives on that street. So what is it actually? It's just comparing your face to what is there. Right.
So let's take a lot of factors in. So let's say I put on a blonde wig again, put on lipstick, and take Annie's identity, right? And let's say on top of that, I don't know, make a plastic card with Annie's name. Which you can do, by the way. It's called carding. You can go on the dark web, buy a bunch of cards, and then
just
make
don't
up these
take
cards.
Annie's name. Just don't.
Just don't.
Any ideas? Salar's got that taken care of.
Don't use Annie's name.
Exactly.
But you can order a machine. It's pretty interesting, and you can actually like print digits on a plastic card and take someone's identity, or rather their credit card info. So let's say I did that, right? Let's say I put all this effort, did that. And then let's say I went to Myrtle Beach and booked a stay at a vacation hall there. But let's say I have vacation on Guest Ranger. So what happened is we would check for a lot of things. So one, we're checking to see if the ID is fake or not. And in that case, we can see the ID is fake because again, I have the debit card with the information, but now I need an ID to match it, right? So I make a fake ID with my face with the blonde wig. However, I put my face on the ID and your information on it. So if you show it to someone, they'll say, oh, well, this matches. This is Annie. Here's her debit card. It goes together. But if you run it through a fake ID model and then it comes back and fills it, then right off the bat, it's going to fail, right? On top of that, if I had Annie's real ID, right, and her real card, but it asked me to take a selfie, then that's another way to fail, because now I have her card, her ID is real, her card's real, but I don't have her face, right? So those are two ways it fails. Now, with the risk score, what I was talking about earlier, is that if I have her ID and her card, I would need her phone as well, right? Because her phone's associated with her name. And we would be checking to see if the phone that guest gave you matches the information that the guest submitted. And if it fails, it's another indicator. So there's a lot that goes into, there's different levels of variations of how we catch fraud. But that's a quick summary of how it would work in real time.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up the machine thing. So two things. One, there was actually a case here over in Destin, Fort Walton. Somebody that I knew had a guest that was in their unit, and a lot of fraud was going on in the community, and they ended up tying it back to this guest in the unit. And he had a machine in the room and he was printing up credit cards. And I had no idea that even existed. Well, then about a month and a half, maybe 2 months later, my husband and I found a movie on Netflix or Apple TV or something about a girl who got kind of sucked into this LA crime ring. And that's what they were doing, is they would give people these credit cards, basically print them up, and they were loaded with certain amounts of money, and they would go buy big screen TVs at a Sam's Club or a Costco. And then they would return return the goods the next day for cash, because they wouldn't put the money back on the credit card. And they were running hundreds and thousands of dollars a week through all these stores in LA. At the end of the movie, she ended up taking the machine and moving down to Colombia or something and doing the same thing. But again, people are so creative with their criminality. It just blows my mind on how you stay ahead of it. But that's just a lot to have to worry about.
Yeah, no, that's super true. And essentially, it's kind of, it's a cat and mouse game, because they're coming up with, they're trying to defeat what we do. We're trying to defeat what we do. So it's a constant cat and mouse game. But yeah, these people, so luckily in our industry, we don't really deal with really, really sophisticated criminals like banks do, right? In the world of finance, you're dealing with people that have created AI to combat AI, right? So they're able to kind of spoof algorithms. I'm not sure if you guys know what deep fakes are.
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah,
so
dub over people's videos.
So for your listeners, if you don't know, you can Google it, but it's basically I took a picture of you, I put it on someone's, I don't know, let's say Jim Carrey's face, just a random example, right?
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
And then it would be you talking like Jim Carrey, or whatever the case is.
Yes. Okay.
And they're using very sophisticated AI models to combat the bank's processes. So luckily we don't deal with that. We deal with, petty criminals that, fumbled their way through a stolen ID or stolen credit card in our industry. And they just wanted the cash from, because you can't really steal money in this industry, as in actual cash. Obviously, you're going to cause the PM to lose revenue, but in terms of stealing cash, you can't really do that. You could steal the furniture and the things in the house, and that's a huge issue as well. But yeah, it's a really interesting world. One other case of fraud to bring up. So what we're talking about is true fraud, which is actual fraud. Another case is it's called friendly fraud. And I think, Alex, you kind of mentioned that earlier. And so I don't know why it has a name, because it's not friendly at all. It's really annoying. But basically,
annoying fraud
what
was
it
just
is,
catchy.
Yeah, annoying fraud. Guest ranger stops annoying fraud.
Right.
So basically, if I booked a stay with whatever XYZ vacation rentals, and I actually made the stay, there's no fraud going on. What happens is I'd go home and call my bank and say, "Hey, someone stole my ID. And this was a fraudulent reservation on my card." And so the bank does a chargeback. They refund that money, because the second you say fraud to a bank, they're going to do a chargeback, because they're so customer oriented. And of course, they're a bank; they should be. But so in that case, the only way to combat friendly fraud is through documentation. Yeah. And so that's why that's another reason why we have the selfie ID and picture of their credit card that we provide to the client to give to the bank as documentation. So if I lied and said, "I never made that reservation," they're going to say, "Well, there's a selfie, there's an ID, and there's a credit card that we know it's yours. How did that happen?" Right. And that's one thing we do as well. But yeah, fraud is fraud is a lot of different branches, and we only deal with two of them.
That's a big thing right there though. And I think depending on the channel that somebody books on, some channels are worse with fraud than others are, but what is the success rate when people go back to their bank after they've provided that verification? I'm sure it improves, but is it like 90% that they get back, or?
So knock on wood, right now it's 100, but the reason I say knock on wood, the reason I say knock on wood though, is because at the end of the day, it's up to the bank to decide if they want to, sell the speed or not. And we can, and there's, with operational and chargebacks, which is a whole different thing. It's like if a guest says, the room didn't match the picture on Airbnb, I'm going to file a chargeback. With those chargebacks, usually the bank's ask for rental agreements, some contracts and other things. That's 50-50. And it's funny because some clients submit the same exact documents to that bank and they do to another bank, and then one will fail, one will pass. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the bank to decide. There is no guarantee, but so far we've seen a great amount of success because you have the credit card ID picture, and you're going to need the rental agreement as well, but it's assuming you already have it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
How long does the check actually take? So I book a reservation with Alex's company, and then the information you send me a notification that I have to provide more information. And then, so again, in the case of the ones that you put a lot of restrictions on, so like a last minute 48-hour booking, obviously you want to get that information back quickly. How long does that check actually take to run through the whole process?
Yeah, great question. So assuming that the guest is going through the most, the strictest check possible, what happens is exactly what you said. The reservation's made, they get a notification to do that verification. And then the actual process of the guest going through it should take no more than 10, 12 seconds, because all they're doing is that they're taking a picture of their ID and a selfie and a credit card if needed. And then immediately after the guest does that, we notify the PM and say, hey, here are the results, either it failed or passed. This is why. And here are the pictures for documentation. So it's right away. It just depends on when the guest does it.
Yeah. And does that notification of failure or passing go into their PMS so that it's an automated back to the guest, or is it actually a physical, here's a message, you need to call them kind of thing?
Yeah. So in some of our PMS partners, it actually goes back inside the PMS. So we're directly inside of their PMS, the user interface. And then the other ones where we're not, it's an email notification that takes them to our admin. It just depends on the PMS use. But in most PMS partners, it does go back straight into that PMS. That's right. Yeah.
And how many PMSs are you currently connected to?
Let's see. I think it's about 5 or 6 or so.
Okay.
Streamline, Track, Escapia, the big ones. And then we're working on a few other ones with Hostaway, Hostfully.
Okay.
So the big ones that
the big ones here,
the majority of people use.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Now, what if a guest books on Airbnb is already doing something similar, right? If it's a new guest.
Right. Yeah. So that's another good question to bring up too. So Airbnb does have an ID verification process. Is it effective? No. And I'm obviously going to be biased in saying that, but it's generally not effective. No knock on Airbnb. If you guys can go in and, create multiple users on Airbnb with different IDs, and still going to create a
that's
user
not
for you.
Yeah.
However, the thing is, Airbnb is not merchant of record. So for the most part, people have the perception that, we're not merchant of record. Airbnb takes the risk. We don't have to worry about that. And that's true. Mm-hmm. Sure. You don't have to worry about a chargeback, but if assuming, right, someone is committing fraud and they're an active criminal, you don't think they're going to damage your house or, steal your furniture.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what they're going to do. It's loose cannon.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is screening required for Airbnb in terms of chargebacks? Not necessarily they take the risk, but is it required in terms of, mitigating the risk of booking a criminal that's using a stolen credit card? Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it just, it paints a true picture of what all of us as the professionally managed vacation rental industry have really sought to build here. Companies like Guest Ranger listened to what's going on, saw the needs of the property managers, and built something that is, to that next level of what Airbnb is willing to go out and risk, But I think that's great. That's really cool.
Yeah. And then outside of fraud too, because I know the topic conversation is fraud. There's also, because going back to what I said, we're kind of under the umbrella of risk management. Guest screening is another solution, I guess you can say. So what I mean by that is, so how do you screen a guest without doing a fraud check? So we have an internal database of reviews that our clients have written about guests, right? So if a guest was like a terrible guest, they brought their dog when they weren't supposed to,
right?
Burn the house down, whatever the case is. They can write a review about them. And if and if the week after, right, another one of our clients, the same guest, those reviews would pop up. So internally, it's a way to kind of see which guest is worth booking and which one is going to be a headache. And I think that really takes the power away from that guest of, blackmailing you over a bad review.
It's funny because like I was saying just a second ago, you really have listened to what the industry needed. And I know 10 years ago, we all here in North Myrtle Beach market had a meeting about, could we build an internal website or system where if we had bad guests, we were sharing that information with each other so that that person wouldn't leave one office and go to the next office to try and, stay there. And we didn't because, we were worried about the privacy concerns and everything else. And it just wasn't secure. Is not necessarily the business that any of us are in. We're in hospitality. So this solves that problem and alleviates things nicely.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Some channels actually, I know, I think Booking has it where you can go on there and you can submit a request to have somebody labeled as a bad actor. But I, having done that for property managers on their behalf before, the process that they make you go through to be able to prove that out. Again, it's like the guest has so much more control over the situation, but this seems to be like very much black and white. Like you have all the backup to show that they've been doing bad things, not just like photos of something in a room that, people make the accusation that they're not real or something. So that's good. So you guys have been in existence for how long now?
It's been about 3 years or so.
Okay.
The first year was just straight up just training these models, and that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of data because it's not just US documentation passports, it's other countries as well. So really any international country, their passport we can verify, with the exception of North Korea. We're not in that market yet, so maybe one day. But as long as you're not from North Korea or booking a vacation on North Korea, then we can verify that passport.
So if Annie suddenly shows up from North Korea,
something sounds a little strange.
So how many checks have you done since you guys started?
I don't know the total amount, but collectively every month we're doing about 25,000 checks.
That's a lot. Yeah.
It's a good amount, and it's growing exponentially. So it's interesting to see the growth of this. When we first brought this to market, we knew that it was going to be there was going to be demand for it, but not as much demand as we expected, which is always great.
Yeah.
What's the percentage of that 25,000 that a red flag gets raised on, would you say?
It depends on a couple of factors. So it depends on how strict they want that check to be. So for example, they can go very strict and fail someone if their name doesn't match, right? So if your name is Christopher Smith and you put Chris Smith as a reservation, that'll fail it. Or they can go more lenient and check for nicknames. They can also implement age verification. So if they're below the age minimum, they'll check for that as well. If your age minimum is 25 and someone's 18, they'll fail it.
Right.
It depends. It just depends how strict you want that check to be. Usually it's what I prefer when I always tell a team, this is really just my philosophy, is I'd much rather have it fail and be a false negative than pass and be a false positive.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as long as you have the technology that's set up to handle these things so that it's not an overburden on the property manager, that there's so many things they have to do to follow up, and then they figure out there's nothing wrong and it just ends up being a waste of time. But as long as the technology backs that up to streamline it, then I think, that makes all the sense in the world.
And one thing you said, Alex, too, a few minutes ago that I like a lot is you said that you're in the hospitality business, not the fraud prevention business or whatever, which is 100% true. Property managers are not in the business of being risk analysts. They're in the business of hospitality. So if you have a tool that just does all that for you, unfortunately, it's a requirement, then you have everything you need in that sense.
Yeah. Now I've rented a 2-row car rental a few times now, and they go through that same process that when you book the car, you have to put your ID, you take a picture, and you have to take a picture of yourself. Is that, I'm just curious, like the technology that's behind an app like that, it's essentially the same thing that you guys do. So can Guest Ranger be used for different types of use cases besides vacation rentals?
100%. Absolutely. It's the technology is parallels what we do 100%. And so it's not just that, the models are just for vacation rentals. It doesn't care. It's as long as you have a selfie and ID, no matter what the industry is, we can verify them. We just like vacation rentals because this is just, the industry that the majority of the team has experience in. And we found that we found that no one really is doing this as seriously as other industries. So we saw that need there.
We joke it's all the cool kids are here. So
exactly. It's a good thing that out of those 300 resumes that you landed on one within vacation rentals. This could have been 300 other different things, but
it was pretty crazy. One really quick thing about that story too is, so out of the 300, there was 5 that reached out. And one of them was Biscore. That day that I went to Biscore, I had an interview with another person. It was like an Alzheimer's startup. It was really cool in Scottsdale. And then I was like, oh, they offered me a position. I'm like, oh, cool, I'm gonna take this. And I think Biscore emailed me or called me. I don't know how they got a hold of me, but they're like, hey, do you mind like coming in there today too? I'm like, I don't know. It's in Chandler. It's like a 3-minute drive. So I was about to not go to that interview. And then, luckily I went. So it's pretty cool how things work out.
It really is. And I have a kind of a funny story that I was thinking about it when you were saying the 300 originally. When I first moved to Myrtle Beach, it wasn't 300, but it was, I think, probably 15 different advertising agencies that I applied with. And only one of them got back to me. And that was the job that I took, and was there for about a year, and then went to one other agency. And then I was at Condo World for many years. But one of the agencies that I had applied to, a guy named George Durant, that was his agency. And I met him later on in my days at Condo World. And he actually became a very close mentor to me over the years. And on I think it was my 30th birthday, we went out to lunch, and he brought me what I had submitted to him from my resume back like 12 years ago at that time. And I was like, I can't believe you have that. And I forgot that I'd even applied with him, but I had, I put my resume in this little box with a spark plug, and it said, I'm a spark plug of creative energy. And it had like a little jump drive on it. I've kept that on the shelf in my office for all this time. He's like, I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you about it. So,
oh my gosh.
You never know. Maybe one of those 5 so cool. Could pop up. Salar.
Right.
Wow. I know. That's wild. Did you, your background's in advertising then, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. That was 100. My dad was in advertising too. And that I won't take credit for that idea. That was him being like kind of outside of the box for creativity, but it's funny when you have those inflection points later on.
Yeah. That's so cool. It's I mean, I guess taking the concept, the principle out of that is, if anyone's listening and trying to get into this industry, or really any industry, just keep applying to a bunch of jobs until one of them says yes. So.
Yeah, consistency, creativity, both of those things will get you a long ways.
We've learned that with 100%. The podcast. You just have to be consistent, and finally people will start listening to you. So
yeah, besides just our dads.
I think you guys have grown a lot. I think when was the first episode? Was it like last year or 2 years ago? Is that
a year ago? November, which is when we started. So yeah. So we're
I remember. Yeah. I remember like your post, you're like, oh, it's 10 days before our first episode, or 5 days before our first. It was a good countdown. And then now you guys have grown a lot. It's awesome. Is it just like being consistent? Is that your key to the growth of this podcast?
100%.
We just talked about that the other day. Yeah. And, Sarah and Annette and a couple of the other podcasts, Will Slickers had given us that same advice early on, that we were asking, how do we grow this? And they all said, you've just got to keep being consistent and it will come. But for a lot of people, when they get into podcasting, one, you realize it's a lot of work and there's a lot to it, but they'll do a couple of podcasts and then they're just like, I don't have time for this. I'm done. But we've showed up every Wednesday since then. And I think the funny thing about having Wednesday every day as our launch date, it really has become like an accountability thing for us, that it's like, no matter what, we've got to get an episode out on Wednesday. So if that means all nights on Tuesday nights, there were many of those before we had an agency and editors that helped us with this stuff. But consistency was a big part of it.
Yeah, well, and Alex she's very tenacious. She doesn't take no for an answer. So she's gonna make you do it. So she's a good partner to have. But yeah, it's good. But we're really, really appreciative of you taking some time out of your schedule to come talk with us about Guest Ranger. And we're seeing you more and more places. I know that you just added Jackie Nord to the team, and she's phenomenal.
So
she's
awesome.
She's just a great personality and so well known. Yeah. I think that's a great ad for you guys.
She's amazing. We're very lucky to have her on the team.
Well, good.
Absolutely.
If anybody wants to learn more about Guest Ranger or sign up or do a demo or how do they reach you guys?
So you can either go to our sites and with a contact form there or reach out to me directly. It's going to be Salar. So it's salad, but just replace the D with an R, SALR.
That makes it sound
I'm going to call you salad by mistake.
Yeah. Annie's asked me but before we got to know you, she was like, I can't remember his name. I'm like, it's Salar. And I'm like, okay, now I know.
So
anybody for some reason
salad with an R, not a D. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
I'm going to scream salad across the showroom floor somewhere here.
What nationality is it?
I'm Persian. So
Persian. Okay.
Yeah. It's like Armenian, Persian, Middle Eastern, basically.
Gotcha.
If you ever see me at a conference, I have like really hairy arms. So that's a good. But yeah, it's Salar and then at Guest Ranger, or just go to your websites and then sign up from there.
Perfect. That's why the blonde wig definitely won't work.
Yeah, the dark eyebrows and the 5 o'clock shadow.
You don't need any of the AI or anything. It's just a given.
I may dress up like Salar for Halloween. Let's see if I can.
Exactly.
Blonde wig with like hairy arms. And
well, thank you so much, Salar. We appreciate you being here. If anybody wants to get in touch with Annie and I, you can go to alexandanniepodcast.com and send us a message. If you're enjoying the show, we would love to hear from you. Please leave us a review on whichever podcast app you listen on. And until next time, thank you, everybody.